somebody that's no longer alive, or just somebody you feel could have handled a society better than the methods that he used today?
Well, better than the methods that he used today. If I refer to history, then the methods that they've used are the
What would you have done?
I would prefer a non-autocratic society, but then something with a dichotomy in it, and so I naturally said, so Elizabeth King of England, but then I wouldn't have used the method.
And God, there is or isn't, I don't know. What do you know?
Presume I'm an agnostic. I didn't question the faith for sure. In other words, if it's vague or broad, you try to tell me that there is one definitely, and suddenly it comes, something like that.
Have you had any exposure to Eastern philosophy?
Very, very good.
You don't dabble in that. You don't dabble in that.
No, I'm open to it.
Okay. I was just about to ask you that. Do you look at yourself as open-minded or hard-headed? How do you look at yourself?
How I look at myself is very, I guess, egotistic. I'll be honest. I mean,
That's the only way to be.
Okay. So naturally, I'll get some open-minded. And suddenly someone will say, I believe in everybody standing on their head, and I'll go, oh, that's ridiculous.
But you won't ask why, or how is it that you believe that? How do you arrive at that?
Usually I will ask.
Okay.
So, I'm like,
As long as you do that, then you're all right. You just wipe it out.
Yeah, I never,
Okay. Anybody want to talk about anything special tonight? We talk about anything at all? Yeah, almost. Alex, I'm going to cover your subject a little. If anybody else wants anything else discussed, yes.
I'm curious as to what kind of future we can expect in different places where we use power sources derived from oil, like internal combustion engines, different transportation, other things where we use that stuff.
I don't think I understand. You want to know what the
What kind of
consequences?
power plants might we get to replace?
Oh, that's different. Okay. General systems all over the country. Individual transportation will diminish, and the general transportation system will be designed, and they'll start installing it and then change their mind in the middle of the project. They'll plan a national transportation system, quite comprehensive. That would mean, like that second picture, massive transportation systems, conveyors, like the stairs in department stores, only multi-stage conveyors that move at different speeds as you step across. Ultimately, the cities will be planned so you really don't have to go anywhere. We always want to get away from cities because they're unclean and they're jammed and noisy and difficult to live in. So we build them and then try to get away from them. That's why people go on vacation. They don't like where they're at. And so if you can make a sort of a second Garden of Eden, which has to be done on Earth, where you have flowers and trees and forests, and the new plan must include what I generally talk about: art centers, music centers, cultural centers, and not only baseball fields, but everything that people might be interested in. And a city has to be more like a university that grows continuously. I don't mean in size, in values and ideas. And there's no static or ultimate design, that every design represents phases. Phase 1, Phase 2. And no one talks of the ideal city, they talk of a better city system. And the city doesn't mean what it means to you here. But a city is a place where you have almost everything you're interested in. And if you don't have it there, if you build a system where humans live and then build some interesting events out here, they're going to be leaving that system continuously. Meaning you work in some industrial plant, you live 20 miles away. The industrial plant will be down under the ground. You'll never see it, and you just take an elevator down. You don't need to go anywhere. You think of all the freeways we build continuously that jam up. And then you build a little suburbia out here, and you got to link that up. And when this gets too jammed, they go way out here and build another one. Everybody works over here. And so you need all of that. All of these freeways that they're building will be obsolete. They'll have to be leveled. The design that we talk about here called socio-cyberneering, which means the application of man's most sophisticated technology to enhance the lives of people, not for the sake of machines, but to give you more leisure time, to give you, say, 2-hour workday and then a 3-day week and then a 1-hour workday and then a 3-month vacation every year until work is phased out entirely, and that everybody is then involved in going back to school for the rest of your life if you wish. Not the schools that exist now. I'm not talking about anything that exists now will be phased out, because most of the subject matter that is presented in schools have to do with this culture and the values of this culture, which are dangerous and mixed up. And there are many people that feel they'd like to change certain aspects of the culture. Well, you can't really do that. The basic language that you get in school, or people that are English majors, are given a language that's obsolete. It's inherited from the Bible, the old moralities, and all of the values that people have are also obsolete. So they think in terms of obsolescence. Whenever they try to think about anything new, they think with the old language. For example, we might admire William Shakespeare. It's like admiring the first photograph. What's happened in all that time? Haven't people improved and learned new ways and better ways of saying things? In other words, how is it we still listen to Bach, Brahms, Beethoven, Wagner? What's happened to music? Today they ought to be almost obsolete in terms of the sophistication of sounds that we're capable of. But our schools push tradition. They push sets of music and sets of values that once served and served well. There's nothing wrong with that music at the time. But it's like you having an icebox in your kitchen, with a hunk of ice in there and some fabric around it, because nobody ever surpassed the icebox. And they're still playing with the violin. It was designed over 200 years ago. It's the same goddamn thing. And the art world is dragging its ass because they admire all those old things. And so you get used to reading things, where goeth thou? And you love the sound, and you cling to it, and you don't move on and past that. So the literary world is dead and dying. The literary world is going to run into a shock more than any other system, because they are people that think they're sensitive. Sensitive means to break from tradition, to improve, to change, never to pick a system and say that's it, but to use a system or a set of tools because it's the best you know at this time. And as the future rolls in, you set your tools aside and come in with new tools. Otherwise, you become obsolete, like our parents in most instances. They died a long time ago. In fact, they never lived. Their general values are that which were given to them by their parents. And so they live a dead life. They keep quoting Abraham Lincoln, who was a horse's ass, and most people that lived in the past. We keep quoting those people, and they're dumb, very ignorant people with very little access to information. We think of Thomas Jefferson as a great liberal, humanitarian. He was also an ignoramus. Compared to what exists today, there's a great deal of knowledge far in excess of that way of thinking. But the schools are sponsored, many of them, by large institutions, put up money and grants, and they, to a large extent, determine what is taught there. You can't go to a university today and say, I'd like to study visual perception only. I'm interested in how we perceive things. You can't do that. You can become ophthalmologist, you can become an optometrist, but you can't go in and do research on the eye as a receptor. You can't go to a school today and study power systems and go in and try solid-state propulsion systems without any moving parts. You can't do that. There's no place that offers that course. Well, there are baseball fields, football fields, boxing rings for kids. Whenever you've got a baseball field, there's no center for chemistry. If the kid's interested in chemistry, where does he go? Suppose the kid's interested in creative music. Where does he go? There's no center out there. The baseball fields have lights, thousands of monkeys sitting on stands watching full-grown people carrying a ball and running. This is nonsense. The Olympics are insane. They'll be phased out. Tennis matches, all sports, competitive sports, will be phased out. They'll be phased out because they serve no purpose. Games that we admire today, like a chess game, which is ridiculous. They say it improves the mind, your strategy, your reason. It improves nothing with your ability to play chess. In other words, if you had a chess game that made sense, if children played it, which I tried to indicate in the past. In other words, here's a chess game the children play, and they got little cards which they match and it gives us soil conditions all over the United States. So when they get through playing a game, they walk away that much wiser. And they know tuberculosis, dominant regions in the United States, goiter, cancer, and they begin to get knowledge about the world. For example, in India, people study business administration. You ought to be studying solar power generating systems, how to pump water out of the ground, how to get 3 to 4 times the yield per acre in food, how to educate their population in new technology, how to make simple things work, how to do away with hand tool labor, and to get away from all that early poetic writing that they have in India, Sanskrit, and all the philosophers which are full of shit. You see, France was once the center of culture, and they had misery and poverty and the same old crooked buildings that they've had 200 years ago. Where the artists love this shit. Quaint roof, they love to paint that crooked cobblestone streets, one shit house for 4 families, and a box of chain that you pull. I'm talking about France. All that stuff that we have romanticized. Even the artist who is sick, he goes into a little area and he paints some Negro shack, you know, and you'll see it in the Museum of Modern Art, you know, and it says chew mail pouch tobacco on the side of the poor guy's house, you know, and that's really a disgrace to do that. And then the physical anthropologist who's full of shit, who goes to an Indian village and lives with them, and he watches them sitting bare ass on the pavement, and most of the kids have worms up their ass and infections on the leg. There'll be no Seminole Indian villages. All that'll be cleaned out, because Indians are stupid, they're socially insane, they put paint on their face, and blah, 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 blah. This exhibition, you might as well have Christians living in clay huts, you know what I mean? So we've got to change our frame of reference, our general systems of thinking, and move toward a totally different method and social aim. We have to change our aims. And so getting back to your particular setup, I suggest briefly, too bad you don't have a tape recorder tonight. If you've got a good memory, you'll have to record this. You feel sometimes you run out of ideas. You can't write, you come in a stalemate. Things stop. Write about that. Write how you struggle to write. How you run out of ideas. And sometimes you come near something, and then it fades out. Write that. The story of my limitations, you see? And write about them, and you become pretty good. Because then you outline all the things you're insufficient in. They become strong and dominant. And then you work on the reverse systems. You improve the area. You think you know what I mean? Let me put it your way. Suppose this is an automobile. Simplify it. And everything works real well, except it shakes a hell of a lot. Every time you go over a bump, it sways for about 3 hours. So you know what you have to do away with is a sway. At least you know where the problem is. Where you fly in an airplane, the left wing starts to flutter. At least you know you work on that. But when you are writing and you run into a jam, you have to define what a jam is. What is a jam? Lack of information? You run out of ideas? No way of achieving newness? You don't have a technique for achieving what you would call situation. And so you'd have to identify what a situation is. Put them down, whatever the hell that is. You see all these points. And then you take them and begin to use them. The chemist can't do a thing unless he learns basic chemistry. The musician tries to describe music, who is most inadequate. Musicians, for example, are, we would call, when I use the term cerebral insufficient, I'm referring to not enough information up here to make a decision. Musicians try to describe their field. They say music, this is their definition, not mine, is a series of sounds so arranged as to produce a pleasing effect. Well, that's nonsense, because my mother doesn't like rock and roll. It only produces a pleasing effect to those that are conditioned to that kind of thing. You play classical music or Beethoven's Fifth, if you like it, in Hell's Kitchen, and then what the hell is that shit? No, music is not a series of sounds so arranged to produce a pleasing effect. It's a series of sounds that you've been conditioned to and find pleasing. Because when you go to China, if you've ever been there, or India, it isn't pleasing at all because you're not used to that kind of music. So they can't even define their own field. The English majors can't even define any of their terms at all. Love, it has no special meaning if you look it up in the dictionary. There's no meaning to any of the words used in this country except technology. It has a clear definition. They describe things quite well. Internal combustion engine is described well. But it's described well enough so people could make it. But language is so vague that people sit and they seemingly talk to one another and they don't understand each other at all. Because every time you say something, I interpret it my way, according to my background. Then I say something and you shake your head and you're pulling out things that I didn't mean at all. Then when you go and tell somebody what I was talking about, you turned it around into a system that you understand. I'm not saying you in particular, but people do this all the time. So language has to be changed. And the people the least able to change the language are linguists. They tried to invent a language once called interlingua, an international language comprised of the many languages, and they thought, well, that might help a great deal. Well, if you had a common language all over the world, it wouldn't help at all. Here's why it wouldn't help. Because the language in America, you have a common language, half-assed language, and you got the Republicans, the Democrats, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jumpers for Jesus, the Catholics. How come they got a common language? How come they can't bridge the differences? And then the scientific idiots also have their limitations. They turn a big parabolic reflector on some area of the solar system, hoping to pick up communication from another planet. They can't even communicate with the Cubans. The Democrats can't communicate with the Republicans. And so, who the hell are you going to communicate with out there? A totally different value system? Scientists themselves are over-specialized. Guy knows nothing but chemistry. Another guy is a physiologist. You talk about human behaviors, and I don't know anything about that. We talk about economics, and you go, well, what the hell do I know about that? And these people are making decisions today. And so, the end product is one mumbo-jumbo maze, which a lot of idealists get together and say, well, we got to get rid of this little wooden schoolhouse here because it's a fire trap. And all the PTA people get together and they beat on the doors of City Hall and they work with some bureau in Washington. Finally, they get the funds and they put up a brick building that's fireproof. But you only collect so much in taxes. The taxes were going to go for firefighting, flood control, and if you persuade them to put up the brick building, they take it away from burglar alarms or whatever other thing the state was going to install. But unless you raise new funds for a project, and this is what people don't understand, if the president got up and said, we've got to tighten our belts, then he's an idiot. What he has to do is say, instead of taking home $100,000 a year, I'm going to take home $20,000 a year. Tighten your own fucking belt first, then tell the public to go easy. All these people, smoking cigars, driving great big cars, you've got to tighten our belts. Son D. Rockefeller, you've got to tighten your belt. This belt goes around the earth. So here you got all these idiots singing away, and the public deliberately educated not to know what the hell they're talking about. That's why they pick up little children and kiss them and take a photograph of their family coming in and out of church. Rarely do you see a politician with his kids on his lap, how we found peace and happiness through atheism. You don't find that sort of thing. You don't find a guy, what, a church? Hell no, I solve my own problem. If I want a better world, I get up off my ass and make it better. And this is the answer. Not praying or hoping. The answer is to work on a system that can diminish problems. Okay? Your system, I went through it real fast, but you have to start categorizing the areas that are insufficient, or the areas that you're insufficient in. Okay? Does anybody want to discuss anything in particular now? Any particular areas before I get into it? Other than, go ahead.
If we speak philosophical, just, skip it. But
I will.
It seems to me that inside a human body with a human brain, we can only go so far. So maybe there's no purpose for any part of it. Couldn't we just better to make machines not only good enough to save us, but do more than that?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make machines that surpass man. Now, a lot of people say, well, how can you make a machine that surpass man? It's made by a man. Have you ever heard that? Well, you hear that. I've read quite a bit about that by people who don't know a goddamn thing about machines. They say, well, a machine can only be as good as the designer. And I want to make that clear if I can once, at least for you, some of you people who are not familiar with it. There's a little guy weighed about 78 pounds, and he designed a machine to pick up freight cars and empty it. Like that. It just turns, now he can't do that. It's much better than he. You understand? There was a guy that shovels coal in a furnace in a ship. Years later, some guy designed an oil burner, and it blasts the oil right in there. There's no coal and nothing, and it generates ultra-high temperatures, and the ship is very powerful, and no man could do that. A guy designs a rocket ship that flies at 25,000 miles an hour to get off the Earth. He can run his ass off. The only best he can do is maybe 20 miles an hour. I don't even know if he can do that. But no, machines always do better than man. Because in designing this type of machine, unfortunately they use it for war and they use it for weapon systems. And some people say to me, well, scientists designed the atom bomb. Yes, because they're called upon to do that. But if they were called upon to say, hey, look at the mess we're in out there. Can you people devise a technological system of transportation across the nation, free of accidents and all that sort of thing? Yes, they can do that. They've never been called upon to do that. And this is why you don't have it. And scientists think that they're brought up in school with a certain value system. They're taught never to question politics. You know, science is one thing, engineering is another thing, but government and politics, that's something else. So they go right on in their own area thinking that, what the hell do I know about government? And they make damn sure they don't know anything about government. And they can manipulate them. They can get some pinhead scientist to make a super weapon up here. And make another guy to make a weapon detector weapon up here. And then they agree to make only one rocket ship, but it delivers 9 weapons in different directions. You know what I mean? And so it becomes utterly destructive and confusing. Well, the scientists themselves are playing a game. They like working on these weapons. They find it to be a fascinating game. They say, all right, George, see if you can figure out the electronics to make this thing land right in Moscow. You know, that would be interesting. The pinhead doesn't understand the Russians are working on the same thing. And so the idea is not to go along with the culture, not to try to improve the schoolhouse or clean up a mental institution. Ever since the book The Snake Pit, they started to clean up mental institutions, and about, 2 years after the Snake Pit was in, went right back to the Snake Pit. So you get out there and call for good government, they throw out the crooks in Chicago, and they got another guy called Daley, a super crook. In fact, so crooked is that system that they can, that he's got everybody on the payoff system so that you can hardly detect it. Now, like I want to indicate to you, Mayor Hague of New Jersey, I brought this up before, but I want to clarify it. He used to hire people to work for his political machine. And when he hired them, he had them sign a confession that they embezzled funds. And so if they ever tried anything, they were picked up. You understand what I mean? Now, that's what we call a closed system. That you think that certain states are great, there's no corruption at all, are so corrupt, so well tied in, that they never detect it. Now, all politics, like I said before, is corrupt. It has to be. Because, as I said, if you run for the governor of the state and I put up money to help you get in, you've got to take care of me when you get in. I'll help you get a bill passed, but you help me get a new canal out there. So don't vote for these people. They can't do anything except obey the people that put them into power. The president doesn't make decisions. The president is a puppet of the big oil companies. All presidents always have been, from Lincoln all the way back to Washington, utterly corrupt. In any country, all countries, all governments. Now, if you are really interested in improvement of the human race, all of mankind, then you're cooking. But if you try to develop like things that they do in this state, they try to get industry to move to Florida. They don't give a shit about people losing their jobs in Jersey. If you can talk this guy into moving down here, a lot of people are laid off in Jersey to make jobs in Florida. So you can't do that. Even if you want to build a new freeway from New York City right on down to Miami, well, these people in Daytona Beach have spent a lot of money in hotels. They'd like you to bend that freeway a little bit over this way. And there's a little town that's going up here in the big city, and the mayor can get them to bend that freeway a little bit over that way, see? And so you can't have a freeway, you can't have a national transportation system unless you put an end to the concept of pressure groups and private ownership. This is the decay of our country. And so if you have a nation that is owned by everybody in the United States, where there's no private ownership, and I'm not talking about communism or socialism, because that's not radical enough. I'm talking about a technical society, not Brave New World, 1984, a society in which scientists and technicians do not manage human affairs, but they only handle the technical aspects of it. And so they build a system of transportation across the nation, every 20 miles, a major link system, and then they have waterways and flood control so that you never read in your newspapers 5,000 homeless in Ohio due to floods, because we hold back the floodwaters by dams and projects. When the snow melts, we build large underground and use the Great Lakes as storage systems for water. And during the drought, we'll have pipelines all the way across the United States, so we have complete irrigation at the end of floods. Then, in joining with the nations of the world on a gigantic cooperative system, we use the polar regions as nature's icebox. We store all surplus foods and grains in the polar regions. Why run refrigerators and maybe big houses with refrigeration trucks keeping your meat cold? You can dehydrate the meat. You can dehydrate a room full of solids like this, say of apples or bananas, and pulverize it, dehydrate it into a cubic foot, and store that in the polar region so there's never hunger in the world again. Also, people talk about population explosions, and if we have a very large population, we're going to run into real problems. And I mentioned to some of you that if we just collected the grass we cut in Florida, stored it, dehydrated, compressed it, we can feed all of the cattle of the earth for 1 year on the lousy lawns that you know here. There's just none of that type thinking in the country. There are a lot of nice guys, sincere guys, like Ralph Nader. I think he's sincere, but he doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground in terms of the problem. Because if you attack the Volkswagen, spend your time unsafe at any speed or anything you want to think, the Volkswagen is a small car, and the Volkswagen saves lives. Here's how it saves lives. If two big cars like Packards hit each other, they stop immediately, and everybody goes through the windshield. But if a Packard hits a Volkswagen, the Volkswagen gets crushed, not the Packard. So it saves the people in the Packard. No, this is true. And when you're a small guy walking down the street with a lot of big people, you learn how to get around, otherwise you get knocked over. And a Volkswagen, how many miles do people travel with a Volkswagen? How many passenger miles for the accidents is what you have to do. So even if you get the assholes that put an airbag in the car, or a safety belt, which they do, they work on that. When you got a safety harness on you and you get hit on the side, it doesn't work at all. So the safety harness only operates on the assumption that you go forward or backward. You know what I mean? And you only have a bumper in front of the car and in back. You'd think that they never got hit on the side, so the bumpers would be all around the car in the future. Not only that, you have radar on the cars, so you can't hit another car. You have a little pendulum in the car. If you get in the car drunk and it begins to oscillate, it pulls over automatically. You don't have any trouble. But if you leave it up to human beings and pack them in cars and turn them loose on the freeway, you got nothing but trouble. Now, there are a lot of people that really try. They try to point out the problems in our culture. And they say, well, it's a goddamn cigarette company. God damn it, if we didn't smoke so much, we'd be better off. Well, Coca-Cola has phosphoric acid, which is detrimental to the spinal cord. And if you go right on down the line, there's hardly anything you eat. There's a loaf of bread that sells for 35 cents. There's another loaf here that's 35 cents. This one here has air bubbles blown in the dough. Big, as you know, it goes away. People buy it. Talk about fraud. Why pick on the poor cigarette companies or Volkswagen? There's fraud. Even when I go out and I buy a little package of pipe tobacco, I open it up and write down in here's some tobacco. You go out and you buy a box of cornflakes. You open up way down in here's the cornflakes. You know, it isn't full of cornflakes. And so everything that you deal with is not worth a damn. They'll put up a CBS house in Florida, concrete block. They say, you want a concrete block, don't you? Then they go and put a wooden roof on it. When there's a fire, all you got is a concrete block. Everything else is gone. And it's so cheap to use light metals on the roof. Let me tell you about square corrugated aluminum. A lot of people say, why, the rain will drive you crazy. But automobiles, you don't hear any noise when it's raining because they have insulation under the metal. It's got a coating, asphalt, all rubberized coating. They got thick foam coating. You won't hear anything. And so the rain doesn't drive you crazy on metal airplanes. You never even hear the rain. You don't even hear anything. So they keep saying that. The termites will drive you crazy. And so if you made your house out of metal, and if you made everything in the house, all the fabrics fireproof, you don't need any fire stations, no fire engines, nothing. If you have toy libraries for children, well, they can go into these libraries, take out any kind of toy. They don't steal anything anymore. As long as they're available. This way, they got all the new police cars and where the blacks live, and the poor white trash, as they call it. They got all these police cars patrolling the area, and these kids have nowhere to go, nothing to do. They say, all right, break it up. Break it up to what? Where do you go? Are there art centers, music centers, cultural centers? No place. In fact, the houses down here on Dixie Highway are so close to the freeway and so close to one another that the people have to stand out in the street and talk at night. If you've ever been to Cuba, the streets are so narrow that the bicycle handles are in close. You ever seen that? Anybody ever go to Cuba or Puerto Rico? Bicycle handles are up like that because the streets are very narrow. You get hit riding a bicycle like that. A lot of people don't believe me. Has anybody been to Puerto Rico now? Or Cuba before the revolution? They still have. Because the streets are very narrow. They jam them in. Then they do a housing project for the blacks. There's no place to go, no place to breathe, no gardens, one little lousy tower after the other. A lot of people think what I want to do is build more cities and buildings. What we want to do is level all these cities, flatten them out, and build a new area with gardens and towers and lakes all around, and music and soundproof buildings, so if a guy put dynamite up his anus and blew it up, you wouldn't hear it. It's got to be that silent. And there are no children running in the hallways. They live at the children's center where everything is built small and reduced. And the people that work there love kids, and they work with kids, not parents. Most parents don't know how to raise children. So if you had that type society, you don't have any noise coming from the children's center. And nobody is allowed to read to children about the 3 pigs or the 3 little bears or anything like nonsense you give them. You start them out with, on the way you met a cow. Moo moo, said the cow. Where are you going? I'm going to school. And then you see these little kids go to the zoo, and they'll say to the giraffe, you're big. And they say to the monkey, what are you jumping all the time for? Because they read these books, and they wonder why at 19, why they're confused. They can't handle real situations. You can read to kids how beavers live in the forest, how little animals build nests, and how they forage for food. There's fantastic things in nature, the sea and color, so many beautiful things to talk about. Then they give me this jack and a beanstalk. Some kid plants a bean, and it grows right up through the clouds. And this idiot kid climbs up this beanstalk. He never waters it or anything. Climbs up, and there's this big ogre. Looks like this in my school book. Bumps all over his head and whiskers all over the place. Mean as hell. You know what I mean? Patches all over, you know. And they wonder why people won't hire people that look like that. There are a lot of people look like that are fantastic people. But they give them a concept of beauty which is dangerous, which louses people up. Like I said yesterday, if everybody had a long pointed nose, they'd tell you to go in for surgery and have your nose right. There's no beauty. You mustn't teach children that some people are funny looking with slanty eyes. You just introduce them to people, and you never put a value on it. See? You don't do that. Then the child meets with Negroes and whites and yellow race and all kinds of people, and he has friends, but the parents say, you're going with that black one, it's a goddamn Jew, goddamn nigger, motherfucking nigger lover. And so you give the kids a set, and they go out into the world and get all loused up. And so we don't want parents to raise children. Some people say, well, some parents know how to raise children. How many of you know how to raise? Very few. And so we're going to raise children by people that really love kids. They can stop and say, hey, Billy, what are you doing? I'm going to take care. And what is it? Tell me about it. To give that kid the time. And to give all children love. No preferential behavior. You're not allowed in the future. You don't pick up a kid and say, now, isn't he the beautiful one? Isn't she the pretty one? You never do that. Then you build jealousy and envy. You put your arm around a lot of kids and say, what would you like to do for them? There's no head of the class. No more of this bullshit beauty contest where thousands of girls go home weeping because they didn't win. See? All of this competition produces a sick breed, including your psychologists and psychiatrists. They're all part of this shit. They try to ingest you with this crap. It's just too bad that new points of view aren't discussed at university. They really don't have any real new points of view because the university maintains the basic concepts that are dominant in the culture. You may not feel it. Even psychologists think that they're open-minded, that they're free thinkers, that they experiment to try to find out whether there's such a thing as ESP. You know, they talk about that. They say, how do we know? Maybe there are people in India that can run a huge joining needle through the brain and move it around and not scramble their mental processes. Maybe there are people that can run a sword through their chest and breathe and not feel pain. And how do we know that? Well, here's how we know it can't be done, okay? Because if you take an automobile and put it in a press and flatten it out, you know, you've seen these reductions of cars to 3 cubic feet, they never drive off again. Once you hit a person on the head with a mallet, the mechanism with which they think is gone. And so, in India, nobody runs a sword through their body. They have a sword, to be sure, and it's made of steel, and it has a curve in it like that. Very rigid looking. And the guy wears an open slot here, which you can't see, and it's bent around his body here, and then turns out. So they run this sword in, it goes around, comes out straight here. Everything is bullshit in India. There's no magic anywhere. Uri Geller doesn't bend keys. He uses laminated metal, dissimilar metals. And if you heat a portion of a table and then put the key there, it's going to turn like that. And when you give him a key, he usually sticks it in some gadget when he's talking, he invents it. He hands it to you. Very low-grade shit. Now, telepathy. Let's try to deal with that, because a lot of people say, well, many times I've had a feeling about something and it happened. Many times I thought about something, and by golly, 20 minutes later, another person brought it up, and I didn't say anything about it. And sometimes a person says, I was about to get in an airliner, and I didn't, and it crashed, and everybody died, you see. And so you get things like that, and there are reports of all kinds of things, and the question is there any validity to that? Is it possible that human beings might be able to communicate by means other than the senses we're aware of? That's the question. Well, they used to say there are 6 senses. In the old days, in my school book, there was 6: sense of touch, the sense of smell, sense of sight. But there's another sense. There are many senses. Human beings have, I'd say, hundreds of different senses. And I'll tell you about it. The kinesthetic sense, in which when you're blindfolded and rotated, if you rotate 3 or 4 times, you get a rough idea where John is. You see what I mean? Because the brain compensates. The brain's topography is not flat. This is a top view of the nose and the eyeglasses. See? The brain doesn't have a fixed or rigid image. When you turn, the brain can compensate for rotation. It has that sense. You have a sense of fullness, internalness, a sense of blood pressure differences. You have exteroceptive and proprioceptive receptors, the outside and the inside. You feel weightiness of the eyeballs sometimes. Sometimes you feel a ringing in your ear. You have internal feedback. Sometimes you have an anticipatory sense, which a little child looking in a store window with toys, you know, like that. You know what he thinks. I'd like to have that toy. You have all kinds of variations of degrees, I'm going to use old language, of awareness, in quotes. So, when you try to measure how many senses does a human have, or how many senses can a human have? I mentioned this before to some of you. I knew an old German mechanic in New York, airplane. And he'd be working in the hangar. And he says, Kunstnau DC-5. And I'd run out the hangar, and there it was, flying over. And he'd be working on it. Kunstnau Sturman Aircraft. You know, and I'd look out, and there was a Sturman. And he never went out the hangar and looked. He says, 5 planes in the air now. And you run out, there was 5 planes. I said, what kind of planes? 1 Sturman, and there's a 4 tri-motor and a Fokker tri-motor, see? And he named the planes. And how the hell are you doing? I thought it was telepathy. He says, the noise is different. Every plane makes a different sound. Cover it with fabric, it resonates differently. I can tell Birgit when she leaves her house, the way her car sounds. And so, we pick up many different things. Once I was driving my car, and I had a strange feeling. I drove up the side of the road, and the kingpin was missing in the steering column. Strange feeling, the goddamn thing, it didn't handle the same way. And there's subliminal cues where a person says, it was nice having you, come again. I mean, get the fuck out of here, I don't want to see you anymore. So the language, people talk to us on many levels. They sit there and they're looking around while you're talking. They say, I have a feeling that you're not interested. Well, obviously they're not. So people do not only communicate with language, they communicate with their body, with their attitude, with their fingers, and with their eyes, and so many different levels. Sometimes you'll see a guy and a girl calling each other terrible names. conflict, you know. And then suddenly they hug each other and kiss each other. What the hell was going on there? Because the language was about something else. The guy really likes her so much that he was telling her the things that troubled him, and she was telling him because they cared. And they didn't care, they'd just walk away. If I don't like anything you do, I'll walk away. But if I'm concerned, I say, look, now let's try to work it out. And you say, well, don't try to work it, and I keep working it because I'm concerned. And these people can't say why they hug each other. They weren't arguing in the first place. No. What we're really concerned about in human beings is the grammar of motives, what people are trying to say, not what we think they're saying. And people are always talking. Well, what are they really trying to say? When a person says, I used to live next door to the Winterbottoms of Long Island. No, that's to impress you with the kind of people he knew. Well, this is another pinhead. Unless he says, I also used to live next door to one Punch Malone. I used to live next door to Pickpocket Jones. See? In other words, if he goes on and names all kinds of people. My father was a great achiever. In Germany, he achieved this and that, and my mother was a whore. My brother-in-law was a thief. You know, then he's all right. But I can't believe some of these people try to do research on the family tree, and they go way back, and they find out that their deceased relatives were once gigantic landowners and princes and dukes. And if you go far back enough, you find pirates and cutthroats and monkeys. How far back do you want to go in the family tree? I'll show you a band of thieves in every family. Because they stopped at some landowner. Where did he get the land? He came over with a bunch of pirates and shot the people that were there. He was called Bojo the Conqueror. If he lost, he'd be a thief. He'd be assassinated. So here you have all these heroes in history that are all pinheads. They're aggressive and vicious bastards, all nations. Where they unify people into a common set, such a parallel set that they all say the same thing when they meet somebody they like. I love you. And the guy says to the girl the same thing, grabs her hand and says, it's nice being with you. And he says, and it's nice being with you. And they hug each other, and they kiss each other nicely, and they rub noses. So they all do the same thing. Looking at, would you like to have dinner with me? Or would you like to go for a drive? Always the same shit. That's why there's nothing new. That's why we find that we forget one person, meet another person, and find that they're replaced very easily, because they're not that different. But the world of the future will be quite different. People will all dress alike in the future, but they'll be very different. As different as you can possibly imagine. But they'll dress alike because the clothing is not the important thing. People try to look different.